Yep, we're on. It's not very fun when you have everything set and it's going and you go, oops, it's not working. Although we record it, there's a little card in there records it. So if it doesn't go up for some reason, we do have a recording. And we use those against you, you know, we keep all of it, all that fun stuff. No. Okay, let's start with a prayer and we'll get started on our review and then our new material. We pray. Gracious Lord, on this day, we ask you to walk with us as we walk through your word yet again. May we gain new insight and wisdom from that which you would have us learn. So bless our day, bless those who were able to come, bless those who can't be with us today. Keep us all safe and in your care in this time and this whole day. We ask it in your most precious name. Amen. So let's see, we have a review, a recap of 27 through 42. First part is the emotional unraveling of Peter. That's a fun way to look at it. Wow, pretty hard stuff. There's a lot of material there. I want to point out a couple of them as usual. You may read them all on your own as you wish. I think the one I wanted to point out most was number 6. This is a quote from Volz from his commentary on Mark. But as averred in the introduction to this commentary, we experience Jesus' resurrection the same way it is experienced in Mark's narrative, through Jesus' word of promise. For this reason, 14:28 really is one of the key verses of the entire gospel. 14:28 is, but after I have risen, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. And it's to proceed, actually to go ahead of, as in proceed to Galilee. So there is the promise of resurrection, even though he's talking about striking the shepherd, scattering the sheep. And in today's material, that's what we're going to learn about, striking the shepherd and scattering the sheep, because they will scatter very, very quickly. Number 8, I wanted to point out, that's from verse 29. Peter told him, even if everyone falls away, I will not. And an alternate translation, the word shall not, is maybe a little more emphatic, yet this is ultimately turns out to be a vain boast, as we'll hear today, because just like everybody else, Simon Peter falls away. They all fell away. Do you think any of you would have been different in the garden? Apparently not. They're quiet today.
Sleeping.
There's one I almost missed because of that. Number 9, where Jesus says, truly I tell you, I think this is the only time that this is spoken in the singular you, because he's talking directly to Peter. I mean, we've seen how many times Jesus says, amen, amen, lego, amen, type thing. Truly, truly, I say to you, and usually it's a plural form. This one is spoken to Peter himself. Just interesting, probably not earth-shattering, but one of those unique things that at least interests me. Number 12. Number 12 was interesting to me. When I was looking at the Greek, it has both the word ou and me, which are basically 2 words for no or not. It's kind of fun. So it's not. So the Lunita people try to emphasize this is a marker of emphatic negation. By no means, certainly not. And you can see it's used also in this way in Matthew chapter 5:18. By no means, never, never type thing. That's just kind of a fun one to think about. The next section was the prayer in the garden section about Abba, 32 to 42. Number 13 reminds you a little bit about Gethsemane. The name comes from Hebrew and Aramaic words for oil press. At least at some point there probably was an oil press. We don't know if there was at that time. Number 14 is an interesting thought. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John along with him. These are the three disciples most full of themselves regarding suffering and endurance. Do you think that's too much to say about them? Full of themselves is a pretty big statement to make, but I think it's close. James and John wish to sit at Jesus' right and left hand in his glory and seek to drink the cup he will drink. We just looked at that today in the service, interestingly. While Peter declares that he will certainly not stumble. Never, never. No, no, I shall not. But he's willing to die with Jesus, except he kind of falls in that. So it's interesting that he takes these three to be closest with him, but like everybody else, they are going to fall away. Stay awake. Number 15. If the three men are awake, they will be able to see their teacher as the prime example, both in prayer and in bowing to the will of the Father. He's only a short distance away, the words seem to indicate. And what could they have learned about living in difficult times, going through difficult things if they had listened to Jesus? Number 20, this is from verse 36. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not I will, but what you will. Number 20 adds the point of Jesus' prayer is not a demand. He's not demanding the Father take it away. He's requesting, if it's possible, and he will accept the cup as it comes. 21 was the thought I read someplace. I thought it's interesting that Jesus, the Son of God, is obedient to his Father while in the garden. And it was in a garden, if you go back to the beginning of the Bible, where Adam and Eve were disobedient to God in a garden. It's just interesting how this true Son of God is now obedient. So Jesus fulfills what people were unable to do. 24 points out that Jesus calls Peter Simon instead of Peter. It's interesting. Mark says, says to Peter, Simon, are you sleeping? So Mark reminds us that it's Simon Peter. Remember, Peter means rock. Peter is not a rock in this time. Instead, Jesus is the rock that will go through these difficult times. Number 26, temptation. We have temptation a couple of other times in the gospel, but this is the only time in Mark where it's used as a noun. Now, I don't know the significance of that, just to point that out. Remember, Jesus is tempted by Satan in chapter 1:13. That's a verb. He calls Peter Satan in chapter 8:33. Remember when Peter says, after the first passion prediction, Jesus says he's going to suffer and die. Peter says it shall never happen to you. But this is the only time the noun form of the word temptation, perismos, is used. Number 30 is an interesting thought. My betrayer is near. And this is going to take us right into our new material. The scene is filled with tension, yes. Judas has not yet handed Jesus over, but we know the outcome, and it's coming very quickly. Because we go then to verse 43, which is new material. While he, as Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, suddenly arrived. And literally the translation would be, and immediately. So either suddenly or something there that's our word, immediately. Euthus, that we've seen so often. The fascinating thing is that we have not seen the word Euthus immediately since, let me give you the right verse, chapter 11, verse 3. That's when they were starting to enter Jerusalem. It's been 3.5 chapters that we haven't seen it. It's interesting to me, at least, that we have not seen it in that time frame. And so it's also interesting how this verse is written, reminding us that Judas is one of the 12. I don't know why that's there, but I guess it's to clarify who exactly we are then. And so he suddenly shows up. with a mob of people, and you'll notice that they have swords, they have clubs. Swords is kind of a fun little word. I guess I used it down below. The sword in verse 47 is where I pulled it out. Machiro. Kind of this seems to be a short sword, one that you could kind of hide in something as opposed to a great big long thing, a long curved one. And it's interesting, it's used of the dagger men in certain, I think it's in, that's referred to in Josephus. So that these people are coming, and it's a mob of people. It's interesting that it appears that if there were a troublemaker around, that a group of people would come to do this. A group of people would come, and it's from the local population. We believe that some of them are going to be from some of the guards that will be later involved, who are Jewish guards for the temple. So a whole group of people come there to do this. And so we have the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. These are the folks. These are the folks who make up the Sanhedrin. So we have the representatives of that group. To whom will Jesus be taken? Do you know who he goes to for his trial? The first person he goes to is the Sanhedrin. Yeah, it's going to be the gathering. Caiaphas and is part of that. So yeah, all of that. So it's later that he'll go to the Gentile one, which would be Pontius Pilate. That'd be a little bit later on. But interesting that they are mentioned at this point. So you see who's behind it. These are the folks. Way back in chapter 3, they started to be upset and wanting to take care of Jesus. And we've seen them come back and forth a couple of different times. Chief priests, scribes, and elders, or their representatives. And we've seen them off and on several times in this story of Jesus in Mark's version. And so here they are. They're going to make sure. And there's a signal. I like that, kind of a signal. I don't know what the signal is going to be, a kiss, right? Which is interesting. It's a signal that he has. And the betrayer, the one who will betray him, it's interesting also. The one who will hand him over, deliver him. That's the word as it's done. The one I kiss. Now this was fascinating for me to look at. If you look on the right-hand column of the point number in 44, I kiss, phileo, which we often call filio, from which a city nearby gets its name, Philadelphia, right? I mean, kind of that. It's interesting that there are two different words used for kiss entirely. If you look a little bit lower in verse 45, that's where he kissed him. And so both of these are verbs. But the second one is katafilio. So you see that phileo is in there as well. It's interesting that it's, and so the question is, why two different versions? I don't know. I don't know what you do with them, but it's just interesting that there are two versions, two completely different words that are used for kiss in this. The one I kiss, he said, that's the one. And so when he kissed him, we have the different form of it. How ironic to use that as a symbol to betray someone. I mean, this should be the exact opposite, right? I mean, this is about that's wrong. I don't know. That's not well put. But it's opposite of what hopefully a kiss would do. I guess we have is this where we get the kiss of death from? That phrase? I don't know. Anybody know where that came from? We have all these sayings. You ever notice we have all these sayings that they just kind of show up and we go, where did that come from? So maybe it came from this. This is the kiss of death, if you will. Because one of the 12, one of those closest to him, not one of the 3 of the 12 at least, but one of those will give a kiss that will betray him, that will cause him to be taken. Well, and you know how the rest of the story goes. The one I kiss, he said. He's the one, arrest him. Now there's an interesting use of arrest and capture. Arrest is used in verse 44. Kreteo is arrest. And in verse 40, did I get the right one? Verse 46? No. No. I'm sorry, it's in verse 48. I wanted to capture. Arrest and capture. Simlambano is the word there. And it's an interesting difference because they arrest Jesus. And Jesus, in his verse, in verse 48, he says, "Have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a criminal to capture me?" And so he trying to make a distinguish between the words that he used and why they are taking him and how they are taking him. Let's see. I'm looking where I'm at. I've seized to take. Okay. The first one, seized. Oh, it's going to be used also. The young man taken in flight. We see the same word used there. That they will try to seize him. And there's something missing in the translation of verse 44. There's a word that's not there that if you look up in, you make sure, I believe I saw it there. Come on. There's a word that's in there that's not listed here. Safely. Take him away safely. Which, I don't know. I'm sorry. I need to look that one up a little bit more, I guess. But so he came immediately. I'm in verse 45. So we have Judas coming. Immediately he went up to Jesus and said, "Rabbi," that's teacher, and he kissed him. That we have that word, yes, that he used there for him. They took hold of him, that's Jesus, and they arrested him. Again, that word possibly used, the difference there, possibly the incorrect word used, I guess, because they take Jesus, and the word used there to arrest should be used for a different type of person, not for what they're taking Jesus for. Does that make sense? It's a little different, and so it's kind of, it shows, I guess, where the hearts of these chief priests, scribes, and elders are. Going to get him any way they can. I'm sorry, Mr. Tim.
I think it captures, you pursue somebody and capture them. You arrest someone, I think typically a white-collar crime, and you might put handcuffs on them, but you don't manhandle them.
Okay, just a minute. Here, sulambano is used. This is in verse 48, not kreteo, which is the, quote, proper word for a seizure. To seize someone should be kreteo. Jesus uses the proper term in his verse. He's saying, and so this is what Volt suggests how to translate it. How amazing that you have come with weaponry to arrest me as if you had actual grounds. This is overkill. You could have simply seized me in the temple. So he's saying that the way you're doing it, you do not need to. I was available every day. Because remember, every day he's in the temple. And so you could have taken me there. But they come at night when fewer people are around. They think they can get him easier, and it's not going to make a big production. That's the wrong word. A big fuss. That's the wrong word. A big riot. Maybe that's better. We'll get there yet. That a mob wouldn't happen and be upset in the temple by taking him. And so if you take him in the quiet garden where his disciples are there, it's more than, we believe, more than just the 12. Remember, we had more than that for the Last Supper. It implies that very strongly. So we have a group of people, but it's still going to be less than doing it in the temple itself. Jim, you had another follow-up, I
Well,
think.
yeah, none of Jesus' actions would indicate that he was gonna struggle or resist. I mean,
Correct. I think that's part of his point then too.
Yeah.
I would have gone freely with you in the
Sure.
temple, but you chose not to take me there. I think they were afraid of the reaction of the crowd because they loved Jesus. They liked what he said. They liked him showing the authority over the religious leaders, the same chief priests, scribes, and elders of the people. He liked all of that. Instead, they kind of, we're going to try to sneak him away. We're not going there today. Sorry, I ran out of time this week. Had a tooth pulled, so I missed today. And I have, since I'm on blood thinners, took a little longer than when you had. Did you have bleeding when you had yours pulled?
Guess so, yeah. I don't take blood thinners.
Mine, I was off the blood thinner and not well. Don't go through all that. It's boring. But anyway, it took longer, so I missed today, so I didn't get as far as I wanted to. So that's why we're only doing this part. We're not going to the next part. But in the next part, when you get into the trial itself, a lot of it's done against their rules and regulations, because you're not to do a trial at night. That's why they do early in the morning, they have the follow-up trial, the legal trial, and then take him to Pilate. That's where all that mess comes from. So we're going to take him at night, we're going to sneak him away, we're going to get a confession out of him, quote unquote, which they kind of did, I guess you could say, and then we'll take him to Pilate and say, take this guy out. Mr.
Is
Jim.
there anybody in the secondary sources that comments on why Mark doesn't make use of the concept of darkness? Because
I have not read anything on that. I don't know. Because Mark is very concise in all of this. I guess that would be my comment. I mean, it's very short and concise what he says.
yes, but the concept of darkness is always linked to evil, Satan, bad things happening. And if he's in the garden back several thousand years ago, you could probably say it could get so dark if you didn't have a moon at all that you literally couldn't see the hand in front of your face. So I'm just curious if anybody has ever commented.
I haven't read that. I'm not saying, I cannot definitively say no, but I have not seen it. I've not seen anyone emphasize. I mean, darkness is a good theme that goes through, yeah. You could write your own commentary on emphasize darkness.
I
No, I mean,
only
it's-
know English and zero Greek and zero Latin and zero German.
You know, there's lots
So
of
I've
resources that
never
could
done
help you
anything
do all
like
that. No, there's lots of resources that could help you with that.
But Pastor,
Yes, ma'am.
but Jesus knows all this, so he's just letting it play out. I mean, that's what's, to me, is fascinating. He knows all this is going to come down. All these players are doing the role that even in the Old Testament would have been prescribed. And so he's letting it just go through. I mean, it's kind of like in our life, he knows where we're going with some of the decisions or some of the actions that we do, but the triune, needs to let it move through. We have choice, but it's fascinating for me to look at from that angle, that they're all doing their role in what they think is the way they're living their life, and yet he knows where this is going.
Well, the material we looked at last week in Jesus' prayer 3 times, he had choice too.
Yes.
And it wasn't, he was asking if there's another way, and there wasn't. So he chose, that would be an active choice, to go ahead. Because he could have walked away. You know, it's dark enough, he could have walked away, especially since all of his disciples, not just the 3, it appears the others are also sleeping then as well. He could have just walked away and they go, where'd he go? And nobody would know. go down to be with the Essenes and kind of out in the wilderness.
Well, if it gets,
But he chose to stay, knowing what was coming, knowing that he was going to receive a kiss. What a wonderful thing.
well, if it's that dark that you can't see the hand in front of your face, that makes walking very, very, very difficult because you have no guidance. I mean,
Even out in the country, I remember being in the country before there were all the outside lights. It would be dark, but you could see. The eyes worked quite remarkably well. And remember, this is also an area to which they went often, so they would know that as well. So, I don't know. But again, he didn't, so I guess it doesn't really matter at this point. They came with, we believe, with torches, some sort of light device, right? So that they could capture him. They could have lit a fire, that's possible too. It doesn't say that, but it's possible since it was cool in the evening at that time. So we're on 45 immediately. Well, that's the second time it's used here. Again, we hadn't seen it for about 3 chapters, but Mark returns to that again. He went up to Jesus and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. And we talked about that. And they took him and arrested him. We talked about that. And it's interesting, verse 47. Who's the one who took the sword?
Peter.
But does it mention his name here?
Mark does his own.
It's interesting again. Remember, this is Mark's gospel. We believe that Mark's gospel is that Peter is the primary one providing him with the information. And so Peter took his sword. We'll learn that in another gospel. I think it's John's gospel. Drew his sword, pulls it out, struck him. The way in which he struck him to cut it off instead of this way, kind of downward stroke, it appears, and cut off his ear. You notice it doesn't say anything else about the ear either, right? But it's from your other time. What does it say? That Jesus basically says, stop, right? And heals the man's ear. And we learned that his name was Malchus, was a servant of the high priest, I think, as a matter of fact. So that would be interesting, that he would have that story to tell about what Jesus did. There might be some, but it's all of that information is left out. Again, short story. Get it as short and precise as possible because he's coming, trying to get to a point, I think, in his story. I was reading and, look at a couple of different commentaries for some assistance and help. And Volt says that at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, they have an oral presentation of the Gospel of Mark. They say that it was designed, certain scholars, I think Volt's would as well, that it was designed to be spoken as opposed to primarily to be read, but in the privacy and all. And so there are several seminary professors and a couple of other folks who speak this. It's not acted out, but they kind of do a dramatic speaking of it. And so I go, ooh, this would be great. So I went and looked it up, and sure enough, hey, they go around the country and do that, but they're not doing it now because something called a pandemic type thing. Hey, you can get a DVD. So I said, ooh, that would be fun. So I went and click, not available, not found. So I'll still look that up. I checked YouTube, tried to find some, but you could see a short little snippet, but it's interesting. They said part of it, you need to hear it as it's being read out loud in a dramatic fashion, that everything falls together a little bit better. So maybe we should read it all out loud here in a dramatic fashion. We could start it. It'd take us a couple hours to do. I can't do that today. We're going to Pennsylvania and visit family, so sorry, can't do that today.
There's a British guy who made
I'm sorry?
there's a British actor who made a career of reading the Gospel of Mark aloud, and he would have the theaters packed. And that's all that he did for years. He just read the Gospel of Mark, and you can find him on YouTube if you have an interest in it. I'll see about getting his name.
Okay, all right. But reading it and experiencing it verbally, I guess, because it's almost like you could hear Peter saying it, telling you the story as it goes through. So how does Jesus respond? So we have the high priest's servant's ear cut off. Yep, it's gone. Nothing said about Peter. Again, interestingly, Volt himself tries to make a bigger deal out of one of those who stood by, tried to make it sound like they're more than just the 12. I don't know if just that's true or not. He's putting a lot in those words. But again, Jesus says, have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a criminal to capture me? Every day I was among you teaching in the temple, and you didn't arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. I forgot to take out gunmos. Sorry, forgot to take that off. I was messing around. Gymnos. Oh, that's naked. I put left naked there. Interesting words. Why do you come as a criminal? Criminal is a robber, a highwayman, a bandit, a plundering rebel. So I think that's the sense that they're trying to put there is that. And so that he would be a plundering rebel, known for pillaging and looting. Lunita suggests insurrectionist, a rebel in that regard. And Jesus hasn't done that. So that's why the word arrest is used above, or capture. Every day I was among you, teaching the temple. You could have got me there. Krateo, you could have seized me. That's the word used there. Taken him into captivity. But the scripture must be fulfilled. To be satisfied, must be satisfied. Oops, I didn't take out seize, arrest from before. To fulfill, to be filled full, it should read. Sorry about that. Scriptures must be fulfilled. Think what happens. Verse 50. Then they all deserted him. They left. They ran away. They abandoned him. Everybody. So we had Peter saying what? Even if everybody else abandons, I will not. I would die with you instead. And all the rest of the disciples who were there at that meal. So we have the 12 plus others saying the same thing. Me too, me too, me too. And everybody deserts him. So Jesus goes on this path alone. I think that's a key point to remember. Jesus is all of the supports are being withdrawn from him. It's going to be he alone. That's one reason I think he's in the garden praying, is to receive that strength and all. We come to the last two fun verses, 51 and 52. Now a certain young man wearing nothing but a linen cloth was following him. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth behind and ran away naked. The word for caught hold of is krateo, which we've seen used a couple of different ways for arrest. So they were going to do the same thing, thinking that he is one of those following Jesus, but he left the linen cloth. Linen cloth is perhaps not as, it says a fine linen sheet, a sheet of there, but probably it's more of actually some part of garment that is used. Let me find my note. The word sindon denotes a fine linen cloth or garment made of it. Here it presumably denotes a linen imation, or outer garment. The imation wrapped around one and could be more easily discarded if it had been seized than a chiton, which had sleeves. The use of chiton is significant. The imation was normally of wool. This particular garment was apparently of superior quality, which the owner would be especially sorry to lose. So it's not the inner garment, but it's the outer garment type thing that would have been thrown on. Some suggest that, again, this is just a suggestion. They don't know. They're trying to make sense of some of this. That this is a young man. Oh, a young man, if you note that on the little note, it says somewhere between 20 and 40 years old. So it's an interesting phrase. Don't remember seeing that one before. So this would be a truly adult young man, but he's not kind of an elder, one to be respected yet. So some suggest that he was nearby in the city when he saw the soldiers leaving, going out, the mob going out to get Jesus, and that he just threw something on, that he had been in bed sleeping. Michael Card believes that it was his mom who saw. I don't know where he gets all this, but he tries to think that, he goes with that John Mark's mother was the home in which the Last Supper was held and all of that. Okay, that's possible. And that then the disciples had already left. John Mark was there with his mom still, and they saw the crowd going after, and so she sent him to warn, and so that's why he didn't have time to put everything on, because they had been cleaning up. There's a lot of supposeds and stuff's thrown in there. I mean, it makes sense, but we don't know. He doesn't identify himself, but this is the only place you'll find this, and because it's unique in that way, it's often thought that this is John Mark, the writer of the gospel itself, that who this is. It does not say that, but it's unique here. Some of the details are somewhat unique, and I don't know, it'd be fun if it were, but if you read different things, like read from Card, here's an interesting little thing. In Mark 14, verses 51 to 52, we find a tantalizing possibility. Mark tells us of a young man wrapped only in a linen cloth who has been following Jesus. When the mob tries to seize him, he spins around and runs away naked. If Mark's house was indeed the one Jesus used for the Last Supper, perhaps the young Mark knew of their intentions to spend the night in the garden. In the middle of the night, hearing the mob pass by his house on their way to arrest Jesus, he leaps out of bed, hurriedly wrapping himself in a linen sheet, hoping to get to Jesus in time to warn him and the disciples what is about to happen. Instead, arriving too late, Mark is almost caught and arrested, having identified himself as being with Jesus and the 12. It is a glorious, fascinating, and ultimately unprovable assumption. But at least he tells us that. It's kind of fun, but it's unprovable. There's a lot of things thrown together to make it all fit so well. But it's interesting that this fellow was there as well. Someone was there. Everybody had left, and this guy was still there. It's kind of like he's the last one standing around, or maybe he's in the shadows because it's so dark, and they finally see him, and he's there watching to see what's going to happen to Jesus. But in verse 50, everybody leaves except this young man, a certain young man. And it's interesting that it's a certain young man, almost like the people who are going to read it know who it is. I don't know, I get that feeling, but again, it's just a feeling that I get at all. So that's as far as I got for this week. Sorry, I didn't get farther. Mr. Tim.
So the other disciples weren't arrested at the same time?
No, they got away. Everybody got away. You would think that chopping off someone's ear, that they would grab hold of him.
Right.
But Jesus, again, we're going to another gospel. We're going to, isn't it John's gospel? We're going to a different gospel, and we'll see that. You get there. Let me read a couple of verses. This is in John 18, start in verse 3. So Judas, having procured a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, went there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing that all that would happen to him, came forward and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, I am he. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. I am he sounds very much like the words that would be used for God's name. So it would sound very similar to them if he said it in Hebrew or in the Aramaic. So he asked them again, whom do you seek? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I told you that I am he, so if you seek me, let these men go. This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. One of those whom you gave me, not one. Of those you gave me, I have lost not one. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. It's interesting, he tells us which ear he was cut off. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me? So the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him, and off they go. It doesn't say talk there about everyone fleeing. That's another interesting little detail. All of these have different details and different points. You know, John, we believe this is John was there. He would have seen it. He has a slightly different spin on it. I don't know. I wanted to say, no, it does not say they were arrested. They all left. Jesus said, let these guys go. You're after me. I think if you look at John, they're kind of like, kind of in awe of what happened. That Jesus, first of all, he calms the situation down. He puts the guy's ear back on. I mean, which they kind of be going, huh? And we have to take this guy in? I don't know. I would start to question what's going on. If I were one of the soldiers at that point, one of the crowd of people coming to get him. That's pretty wild. But the disciples all flee. Again, it's only John, I believe, who's mentioned it being at the cross. Remember, John gets Peter into the evening trial area, and we have that coming up here in John 18. Tim, follow up?
Yeah, and you said that Jesus said, let them go. I mean, he said, I'm the one you want. So I guess that.
It's interesting that none of that, again, Mark's is very short and condensed, and we get some of the fuller details of the event from others. But Mark doesn't list any of that. He just kisses him, boom, off they go, after someone's ears cut off. Because the next thing in verse 53, they take him away, and the trial will begin.
You said earlier that they did not, custom-wise, they didn't have a trial at night.
According to the rules of the Sanhedrin that I have read, that they are not, it was not legal to hold a trial at night. It must be held in the daytime, and that's why they hold a second trial, or the official trial, the daytime, to make it legal. Is that John 2? Also, I think. Nope, it's not John. High priest goes to Caiaphas, was high priest, and the high priest questioned him. Annas. It's in Luke chapter 22. We have at night, Jim, here's your darkness. It's in Luke chapter 22, verse 53. When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness. So Luke gives a little bit of that theme of darkness. So then they take him to the high priest's home, and they're doing a trial on him. And that's when Peter denies Jesus. Jesus will be mocked. And then in verse 66, when the day came, the assembly of the elders and the people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, then they led him away to the council. So there's an evening event, which would not be legal, and there's a daytime event, which would be legal. And then he's taken to Pilate because the Jewish people did not have the authority to convict someone to death at that point. Judy?
As you're relating to the different writings, that's what gets sort of, people discredit the inspired word of God when they see that all these authors do the story a little bit differently. But actually, the Lord is letting these folks write from their point of view too. I mean, it's fascinating that we gather more information from each of the authors, and yet it's all inspired. And yet, again, he lets us be who we are when we're telling the story of the Lord too. And that to me only adds, again, we were talking about the credibility of these disciples, or the credibility of the people that followed Christ, because they are different and they are coming from their life or their life experience to talk about the Lord. So
if you had 4 versions that were word for word identical,
right,
would that be less?
Yeah, to me it's less.
Okay. Some people will agree with you, others would say, oh, it's like you were saying, it's too different, it's quite different. Well, if you put them all together, you can get, if we saw an accident,
yeah, I mean,
we'd all have a slightly different view, we'd have different insights and such. So I think you get a little of that. But part of it, I think, is to the audience to whom the primary audience that the author was writing as well. Whose view are they using? Mark's view is Peter. I mean, that's his lens to the event, if you will. Although maybe verse 51 and 52 are he himself. By the way, did you notice the word naked? The word, how it's spelled in Greek? Gymnos? I thought that interesting. So when they did Olympics, the Olympics were originally done gymnos. There was no clothing on. And that was a problem then for young Jewish boys, because Jewish boys would be distinguished, right? If you're naked, you could say, oh, that's not a right, that's a circumcised person. So there were actually instances where they tried to be uncircumcised. I don't know how you do that. Let's not go there. That goes pretty far, pretty fast. I don't know. But it's just interesting to me that that word, the word, we talk about the gym, and that was originally done with no clothing, or mostly unclothed type thing. So we're going to pick up the next week with following up on that at that point.
So then the remaining part of the night was when he was scourged and beaten, ready to secure.
No, not that night. That's going to be the next day. That's going to be by Pilate, right? That's going to be during the daytime, on what we would call on Friday morning. So yeah, we're going to, this is Thursday night we're at, and so sometime overnight would be before Caiaphas and Annas, and then the official trial early in the morning. They take him to Pilate, where Pilate will have his thing. Well, we're getting ahead of it there. That would be Friday. So Friday is going to be a busy day too.
And that's when they were looking for a confession?
Well, they get, Jesus says, I am. So they ultimately, it's almost, I guess you could say, Jesus enables it in a little way. You could say, okay. I mean, they tried to with various different people, but they couldn't get the witnesses to agree on what Jesus had said, interestingly. Again, the irony of being betrayed by a kiss by someone who's one of the closest to you. Should have called this the kiss of death. Well, let's stop for today. Get you out a few minutes early. Let's have a short prayer. Gracious Lord, help us as we ponder the events of Holy Week, and as we look at them from the views of different individuals who were witnesses or spoke with witnesses about them. Help us to see how you endured it all for us, and help us to keep our eyes on you in the midst of this difficult experience. So watch over us this week again as we leave and place ourselves each day in your hands. We ask it in your most precious name. Amen. Cut this off. If you're watching, thanks. Sorry I didn't get stuff sent to you, so some of you